How do I find the partner right for me on, well, internet dating sites? But they, the question was meant more broadly. And I answered it badly the first 2 nights. And the third night, when the same question came up again, I thought, that's not a good question. That's why I'm having trouble answering it. That's also a very useful thing to know. If you're ever asked a question, you're not obliged to answer it the way it's asked. There's always presuppositions built into a question. The question begs the answer, right? Which is, the question is formulated in such a way that only certain answers are permissible. Religious scientists often do this when they debate religious people. They sort of start with the axiomatic presupposition that the only reliable form of reality is objective reality, and then they Shanghai, in some sense, the unsuspecting religious person into accepting that presupposition. Then they say something like, Christianity is a pretty foolish scientific theory, which it is, and so then the religious people lose, but it's because they accepted the terms of the argument without question. In any case, how do I find the partner that's right for me? Well, you could start by not asking that question. How about, how do I become the partner who's right for someone else? And I would say, if you really concentrated on that, then you'd have no problem solving the problem, right? If all you did was to figure out, you're a man, what do women want? Well, they'd like you to be strong. They'd like you to be reliable. They'd like you to be adventurous. They'd like you to be cool. They'd like you to be competent, productive, awake, alert, reciprocal, generous. It's like, well, be all those things. Start working. You're 15, of course, you're bloody useless. So it doesn't matter, because you're in the same boat as every other 15-year-old. You expect the world to fall at your feet when you're 15. Like, that's not a favor your parents have done you. You got 10 years, and you can put yourself together pretty well by the time you're 25 if you really take a crack at it. And so if you concentrated on being the prince, you'd find the princesses would line up quite nicely. And so you want to think through what you want from a relationship. And I suppose a casual sort of hedonism beckons. Some boys, young men, are in the hypothetically fortunate position now, partly because of dating technology, that they can enjoy an endless buffet of willing young women. But there's something really psychopathic about that, So imagine you're successful enough as a young man, maybe you're at a university where there's a preponderance of women, and you're in the high status young male position. And so you have a pretty decent array of choices in front of you. And so you sleep with a different girl every 2 nights. Well, you don't really sleep with a different girl. You sleep with the shallow representation of a different girl every 2 nights. So because you don't know her, and you might think that doesn't matter. It's like, well, what are you practicing here? You're practicing to use other people in the most intimate possible manner as nothing but an instrumental ends to your own short-term hedonic pleasure. That's psychopathy. That's what that is. You practice that 100 times, guess what you are? And if you think that's going to serve you well for the rest of your life, you're sadly mistaken, because it's not. And so your sexual behavior should be encapsulated within a global, and I would say even theologically based ethic, but we could start just with philosophically based. It's like, well, you want to have a relationship with someone? You want someone around you can trust? You want someone around you can tie your life to in this way that weaves a rope? Do you want someone you can grow old with? Do you want someone to be a mother for your children, assuming you want children? And if you don't want children, well, you probably will. And if you don't, you're either deluded or immature. So, and you might say, well, no, the planet has too many people on it. It's like, yeah, whatever. Good luck with that. And so every single one of your ancestors reproduced in an unending procession lasting 3.5 billion years. And they're all wrong and you're right. It's like, I don't think so. So you can just drop that. And if you're not sensible enough to see why a stable monogamous relationship with children is the right outcome, then You've been badly served by your culture. You're narcissistic, shallow, immature, underdeveloped, and deluded, at least in part by your own hedonism. I'm polygamous. It's like, yeah, whatever, or polyamorous or whatever the hell it is that you think you are now. We know there's a couple of stable solutions to the whole set of problems that life presents. And monogamous, heterosexual coupling is the best solution we know. Now, does that work for everyone? No. And it doesn't work perfectly for anyone because we're all flawed and inadequate. But as a basic rule of thumb from which you deviate at your peril, that's the canonical norm and the appropriate ideal. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't tolerate other arrangements, but we should tolerate them knowing they deviate from the ideal and that there's a price to pay for everyone involved. And so you got to envision this. Imagine you had a partner you actually loved, that you actually respected, that you actually cared for, that you actually found attractive, that was willing to negotiate with you on the erotic front for the rest of your life, which is a very difficult thing to pull off, because one of the things I used to tell my clients and my students when they asked was, well, how fast should a relationship progress physically? Well, here's a rule of thumb. Don't do anything with someone that you couldn't talk to them about beforehand. Well, I'd be too embarrassed to talk about that. Well, hey, maybe you're jumping into it a bit too quick then. If you don't have that level of communicative intimacy, what makes you think that you should have that level of physical intimacy? The communicative intimacy exposes you less than the physical intimacy, obviously. So you're putting the cart before the horse. And if you have a partner that assuming that you find each other attractive, which is a bit of a wild card, and a bit of magic, and then you can negotiate. Like, there's no doubt that people in monogamous relationships, all things considered, have much better sex lives. So, and of course, why wouldn't they? So, and you think, well, it's the same person all the time. It's like, well, maybe you lack imagination, both in your approach, but also in your rituals. Good collection of lingerie will do wonders for that, and so you can use your imagination and play if you have a willing partner. And you shouldn't restrict yourself. Like, if it's one of the things, this is part of the incorporation of the shadow, you may have an array of fantasies about what you require on the sexual gratification front. It's like, you could let your partner in on the secret. It's possible that they have some fantasies too that they might be willing to share. And so maybe you can have your cake and eat it too, and so that's worth. And is sex with love better than sex without love? Well, is anything worse with love? A meal? So that's just a stupid question. It's a naive question. And of course, people are afraid of that because they're afraid of being intimate. They're afraid of that kind of self-revelation of vulnerability. And no wonder, because the more you reveal yourself to someone, the more you can be betrayed or hurt. But that's also kind of courage to allow yourself the possibility of being hurt in that manner. Also opens yourself up to the possibility of genuine what? To your heart's desire and living happily ever after. Right. You're never going to get there without being vulnerable. Men and women say, well, I wish he would be more vulnerable. And it's not exactly clear what they mean by that, right? Because they don't mean be weaker. They do mean, though, be more carefully honest. And that is the basis for genuine intimacy. And that's the basis in turn of a stable and expanding relationship. And then you can have your kids. And if you think kids are a burden, then you're an immature hedonist or you've been watching too many Hollywood movies with like kids that are just brats. It's so frequently the case. It's one of the big failings of Spielberg. All the children in Spielberg movies they're brats. You wouldn't want to be around them for 10 minutes. But that isn't what children are like if you have any sense. You can have the best relationship you've ever had with anyone in your life with your children. That's the promise of children. They love you. They will love you if you attend to them. And you can structure that relationship so that it's the clearest and cleanest and least trammeled relationship you've ever had with anyone. And if you do that, the amount of effort that you have to put in compared to what you receive, they're not even in the same universe. So the notion that children are somehow a burden, what are they interfering with? What have you got to do that's so important? What, you're going to drink 2,000 less 26s of vodka with your idiot friends at the bar? That's your brilliant alternative to growing up? And I do believe it's very hard for people to grow up if they don't have children. And people hate it when I say that, because there are other ways of growing up, but it's very hard. And the reason it's hard is because you are not mature until someone else clearly matters more than you do. And if you aren't narcissistic beyond redemption, that definitely happens to you when you have children. And then you're an adult, even if you're not that good at it, as long as that other person is now something you would die for, and really, or something that you would live for, then you're an adult. And the thing our culture doesn't really understand, with its idiot emphasis on the supremacy of both teenagehood and childhood, is that it's way better to be an adult than to be a teenager or a child. When I was 14, I took a good look at my friends and my situation, and adults used to tell me, these are the best years of your life. And I looked around and I thought at my friends and I thought, oh my God, that better not be true, because this is not good. The parties I went to, the music was so loud no one could talk. Everyone was so damn drunk they were falling on their faces. And if they weren't drunk, they were so stoned out of their minds that they couldn't even communicate. The music was loud and it was dark, so nobody had to see each other. If there was any contact between boys and girls, it was usually drunken and post-interaction regret laden and dismal, dark, brutal, not good. I swore when I was that age I would remember what that was like. And then I learned as I got older and watched my peers get older that they would reshape their memories of being a teenager and become maudlin and sentimental about those good old days. And it's a kind of delusion that people settle into, but it's not accurate. And why is being not autonomous better than being autonomous? When you're a teenager or child, there's an innocence in childhood and a freshness that's quite remarkable, and there's something to be said about that. But the lack of autonomy and the lack of ability is a terrible price to pay for that. And I think it's worse when you're a teenager. You have almost no autonomy. And so why isn't being an adult better than that? By a lot. And it might be, the thing about being a teenager is there's still a lot of you that's potential. And you still have the romantic adventures lying in front of you. And you can settle into an adulthood that's stagnant. And in that case, when you retrospectively look at that potential, it can beckon. But that's a failure of development, not an indictment of adulthood. Because if you're an adult and you're mature and you tell the truth, then the world is a horizon of adventure in a manner that is just not accessible to a teenager. So why would you grow up and get married and have children? It's because, first of all, getting married and having children, that's 2/3 of your life. Even if you have a spectacular career, your marriage and your children are going to be, at minimum, as each of them is going to be as important as your career. And that's if you have a stellar and spectacular career. If you just have a job, the job pales in comparison to the importance of your marriage and your family. And so you might say, well, I don't want to get married. I don't want to have children. So, well, that's what people do. That's 2/3 of your life. If that's just off the table, what are you going to replace that with? What are you going to replace that with? Stupid drunkenness with your idiot friends, something like that. Or this desperate attempt to keep that teenage hedonistic potential alive. And you see these guys who are 30 or 35 or 40, that's even worse, still at university parties, or even worse, teenage parties, still being the teenager at the party. It's like, you're not the cool teenager at the party. You're Uncle Sticky in the closet. It's not pleasant. So that kind of failure of development, that gets really ugly as people age. And they don't notice, but anyone with any sense keeps their distance, especially if they're drinking. So grow up, man. Why? Because it's way better. If it's done right, it's way better. And of course, that's what you should teach children too. We put children on a pedestal. And you can understand that. I really like being around children a lot. I like children a lot. And I had a blast with my kids. But children should value adults over and above children, not least because they're going to be adults. So if the message to the child is childhood is the apotheosis of your life, it's like, well, it's all downhill after 9. That's kind of a pain if you live 80 more years, just dragging yourself out after you're no longer 9 or 14 or 15, whatever it is. And so that's also why, and I think this is a good message for women, because lots of women worry about their career. Is my career going to interfere with my relationship with your children? Does not hurt your children to see you doing something that's adult, that's for you, and that supports the family. There's nothing wrong with that. That's like good role model. And children absolutely 100% need to learn that adults have important things to do, and they are not to be interrupted unnecessarily while they are pursuing those things. Not least because the children need to see that adult pursuit is valuable and worth attaining. So every time you denigrate an adult in favor of a child, you just teach the child that there's no use in being an adult. And then you have Peter Pan, that's King of the Lost Boys, and in love with Tinkerbell. What did I call her? The porn fairy. Yeah, he doesn't get the real girl. It's hard to beat honesty. The basis of my wife and I, we swore that we would tell each other the truth when we got married. We'd both banged around enough by then, so that was pretty serious. And she might have been better at it than me, but we've stuck to that. And that's such a relief. It's such a relief to have someone around that you can tell the truth to, that you have a history of the truth with. And that's especially true the longer you're married, because if you're lying to each other, then those accrue and they turn into a monster that eventually devours you. And you can walk into houses where that's the case, is everything's based on a lie and everyone's walking on eggshells, and the closets are full of skeletons and there's snakes under every carpet. It's dreadful. And everyone in that place is hyper stressed. And nobody can ever talk about anything important because divorce is always looming. It's awful. So honesty, that's really helpful. And so what else makes a good husband? Pasty, listen. That's really important. Carl Rogers has good advice for listening. The clinician, he said, you listen, and then you tell the person what they said in words they find acceptable or better than acceptable. Yes, you got exactly what I meant. That's really helpful. You really want to hear what your wife has to say. She thinks differently than you, and you might be wrong. And she might not even know what she thinks. Lots of people don't know what they think till they talk. And so if you don't listen, she can't figure out what she thinks. And then you don't get the benefit of the fact that she can think and that she thinks differently. And that's extremely important, especially when it comes to your kids, because in some sense, the maternal, and men and women can play this out differently, but the maternal spirit says, fundamentally, you're welcome here and this is your home and you're loved for who you are. It's a welcoming and nurturing spirit. But it has to be offset by another spirit which says, you're not everything you could be. And we want to see you develop and leave. And there's a tension between those two things, because in every family and with every child, the question is, well, how much do you forgive? And how much do you embrace? And how much do you say, no, that's not acceptable. You can do better and you should do better. And if you're going to live under this house and you're going to live in peace, we're going to talk till we get this figured out. And that's way harsher in the short term because it causes conflict and it calls the person on their action, but it's much more merciful in the long run. And the patriarchal spirit encourages and fosters independence, and the matriarchal spirit shelters and protects and forgives. And both of those are crucially necessary. And then the question is, well, how do you get the balance right? And the answer is by talking. That's the only way, because one child might need more care, and one child might need more cut and dried rules plus encouragement, very much dependent on the child. And so there's no way of getting that right without knowing the child, but also communicating constantly between the man and the woman. And if that works, then the children have parents that they can rely on and that they can be encouraged by. And that's a great gift for the child. So that's another. And then husband, let's say, and father. Well, father plays differently with children, teases them more, calls them out more, enforces boundaries more, shames them more in a manner that's complimentary. That wasn't the best that you have to offer. Is that an insult or is that a compliment? That's a tough question. And what I've seen from young men, and I've talked to many, to say to a 18-year-old, you're okay the way you are, that just deflates them. It just deflates them. You say, you could be a lot more than you are. You could be so much more than you are that the boundaries of that are unimaginable. That's a way better message to someone who's in despair. Because what? You're okay the way you are, miserable, suicidal, nihilistic, hopeless, amotivated, resentful. That's no time for, it's no time for a maternal embrace. It is in a sense, because there's comfort in that, but mostly what that's time for is the clarion call to maturity. It's like, no. No, most of you has to go, man, but the best of you, it could come forward, and that best is there. That's way better. That's way better. And so that's another thing that a father and a husband can offer, and to the wife too. It's many women haven't had a good relationship with a man, and they need that masculine spirit. That would be the animus within, from the Jungian perspective. They need that masculine spirit to say to them, you've got the hero within as well, and that you can pursue that. And that's especially true in the modern world, because women have reasonable control over their reproductive status now, and that opens up the domain of heroic achievement to them. And the woman needs to find the balance, as a man does, but more importantly for a woman, she has to find a balance between that all-encompassing maternal role and operation in the world of heroic achievement. And the man can say, in Sleeping Beauty, when the prince awakens the princess, well, that can be a prince, that can be an external factor, but that can be the masculine spirit of the woman awakening the feminine spirit of the woman. That can be viewed as an internal drama, that the woman has to become the mixture of the prince and the princess. You can read that fairy tale both as a love story and as a psychodrama equally well. And a man can play that role for a woman and see those elements of her that could succeed in the masculine world that she might be doubtful about, perhaps because of lack of paternal support, and identify that, point to it, clarify it, and support it. And that can be extremely helpful. And then, of course, if you're the husband, well, then you have a more competent partner. And unless you're terrified of that, which you shouldn't be, then how is that not good for everyone? And then, well, then there's the classic elements of being a husband. So when my wife and I got married when we were about late 20s, I'd known her for like 21 years by then, but that's when we got married. And she wanted to have a child pretty much immediately. And I was still in graduate school. And so I didn't have my career set up. I had good prospects in front of me, but I wasn't stably set up financially. And I had no idea where I was going to move, because if you're looking for an academic position, you have to be willing to move anywhere in North America. It's really that broad, because academic positions are rare and hard to find, and at any given time there might only be a few dozen available, and you can't work at the university that you graduated from. That's forbidden by custom. So you have to be willing to move anywhere. And so that was all looming in front of me, or beckoning in front of me. And she said she wanted to have a baby. And I said, I don't think I'm ready for that, or we're ready for that. But I went away and thought about it. I thought, okay, because I'd learned some things about how to think by then. I thought, okay, I don't think it's time. That's not a very good answer. It's vague. And it's never a good time to have a baby, obviously. So what's the problem here exactly? What's exactly the problem? I thought, I don't really know what to do with a baby, like an infant. I worked in daycare. I knew how to take care of little kids, like once they were toddlers, essentially, no problem. But infants, I didn't know what to do with an infant. And I think most men are like that. For obvious reasons. You just have to think about it for 15 seconds and you can figure that out. And I thought, okay, I'm worried about the infant. Am I worried about the toddler? It's like, no, I know what to do with toddlers. I like toddlers. That's no problem. And kids older than that, that's no problem. So that's not the issue. And really, it wasn't finances. It was the infant. I thought, okay, what role do I want to have? We have an infant, and I'm going to say yes. What role do I want? Oh, I can take care of her while she takes care of the infant. And so I can take care of both of them. She has to take care of the infant fundamentally, but I'll take care of her. So I went and told her, I said, okay, well, here's the deal. You want to have a baby. I don't know what the hell to do with a baby. But if you're willing to take care of the baby, I'm willing to take care of you and the baby. And she said, well, I'm willing to take care of the baby. And I thought, okay, well then, okay. And so then we had Michaela very shortly after that. And that's what we did. And whenever she was tired, I'd spell her off. And I mean, I learned how to make a relationship with Michaela when she was an infant, but it took like 6 months before it takes a long time for a man to establish a relationship with a baby. Women get prepared, because there's a lot of changes, hormonal changes and so forth when they're pregnant. They have 9 months to really, for the reality to settle in. And there's lots of biological transformations. With men, it's sort of like this little vulnerable football appears on the scene and you have no idea what to do with it. It's like, well, if your wife is willing to take primary responsibility, then that worked for me. I don't know how effective that is for other men, but I suspect it's exactly the same bloody thing. So that's another thing a husband can do, is take care of the wife and infant. That's a good role. And the thing is, it really works for a woman, I think, in the most fundamental sense, because, maybe you're going to have 4 kids in your life. You're a woman, you have 4 kids in your life. That means you basically got 36 months of your total life with an infant. That's it, 36 months. It isn't obvious at all that you want to miss that. And so if you offer a woman who isn't ideologically addled the opportunity to actually have that maximum 3 years And to really engage in that, well, that's a huge part of the adventure of her life. And it sets the stage. You really want to get that right. If you want to have a good relationship with the child, those first 6 months, 7 months, when the child is so dependent, crucially important, requires a tremendous amount of physical contact and nurturing and attention, careful, focused, alert attention. And deep down in every woman, regardless of what they say when they're 19, because what the hell do they know? That's a deep dream. I talked to Franz de Waal the other day, a primatologist, and he said, we were talking about interest and toy preferences among chimps. If you give a juvenile female a block of wood, she'll carry it around on her back like a doll. And if you give her a doll, well, that's definitely an infant or a teddy bear. So the chimp females will carry that around for like a toy, like a human child will. If you give it to the juvenile boys, they just tear it apart, see what's inside it. But the female will instantly bond even with a block of wood. That's deeply, deeply rooted inside of us. And if you can offer that to a woman, and she trusts you, and she trusts herself, and she believes that there is something to femininity, the Virgin Mother, if she believes in the archetype of the Virgin Mother, if she's willing to manifest the spirit of Mary, then you can offer her that opportunity. And then you have children that are loved. And that's something. Warren Farrell told me yesterday, he wrote The Boy Crisis, he said that boys who don't have fathers have telomeres that are 14% shorter by the time they're 12. And the telomere is a cap on the end of DNA that determines how many times the DNA molecule will replicate. And that determines how long you're going to live. And so if you're fatherless, by the time you're an adolescent, you're already going to die sooner. And it's particularly true for boys, but it's also true for girls. And so we have no idea how important those early bonding experiences are. I talked about fathers in that situation, but that bonding between a mother